My name is Marvin Sigford, and you're watching The American Dream on Literature Works, sponsored by Harvey Incorporated. Last week, we explored the many writing techniques of Henry Longfellow and Ralph Waldo Emerson and how they affected society's view on Romanticism. This week, I'm excited to inform you that we will continue to uncover the truth behind the Romantic movement and its role in defining the stigma of the all-glorious American dream. Just to recap, last week we determined that the American dream, simply put, is the freedom to make your own life exactly how you want it without the fear of persecution and ridicule. So one might ask, how does one relate the Romantic era to the American dream? Well, in many ways actually. For one, the whole idea behind the Romantic movement was escapism. People needed outlets for their unhappiness in the industrial times, so they ran away with their imaginations into books, music, and art. Many romantics utilized numerous forms of nature and divinity into their works, as well as fantastical journeys filled with adventure and danger. When one reads a story written in the Romantic era, it is evident that the author is allowing a mental escape for the reader, whether it be by taking them back in time or the future, or even by encompassing themselves with someone else's trials and tribulations. To summarize, the whole idea behind Romanticism is escaping reality and replacing it with fiction. For example, one of the many talented writers of this era was none other than Nathaniel Hawthorne. His most renowned novel known by many was The Scarlet Letter. This story foretold the trials of Hester Prynne and the things she underwent after bearing an illegitimate child. This story has virtually no happy moments, and is what most people would call a downer. Hawthorne's dark and tragic mind was evident in The Scarlet Letter, most probably because of his angst towards a certain ancestor who sentenced 19 witches to death in the Salem witch trials. Once he was old enough, Hawthorne changed the spelling of his name as to draw a distinction between himself and his familiar past. Hawthorne's father was killed on a sea voyage when he was little, and his father left behind his wife with 3 young children and no source of income, other than the charity of his relatives. Once Hawthorne was old enough, he went to college but didn't appreciate the education and slacked off. However, he did graduate, and once he returned to his hometown in Salem, he spent virtually 12 years stuck in a room perfecting the craft of fiction. He then published a collection of stories called Twice Told Tales. A few years later, he married Sophia Peabody and moved to Concord. There he grew restless with his position in life and grew complacent. He missed deadlines for publishers and eventually grew ill and died. Many would say Hawthorne died from his own doing. His whole life was pushing people away and focused only on his work. It was his escape from an otherwise lackluster life. In many respects, he is the perfect embodiment of Romanticism. The writing of this age was all about getting away from reality and finding truth in the fiction of life and nature while encompassing one's imagination. Hawthorne made his life lonely and unhappy. His only escape was to write about other people's troubles in order to forget his own unhappiness. Even though Hawthorne wasn't a romantic, ironically, he encompasses all of what makes the Romantic era. Nevertheless, Hawthorne did what he wanted with his life. Since writing made him happy, he darn well chose to write his life away. But no one could say anything negative about him because maybe he actually liked his life. Who knows? But the whole point of the American dream is not to be ridiculed for your differences. Just like Hawthorne, Edgar Allan Poe had a dark take on life. He utilized one of the popular vices of the era, fantasy. He was known for his dark and depressing short stories and poems. He, in a way, escaped the real world for something much more crude, despair. Things didn't go well for Poe in his life. He lost the love of his life to death, and from there, he spiraled into darkness. Poe's escape was to live in his despair by writing about it in the form of different characters and settings. He fits well with the American dream because people loved his work for a reason. It was so unlike anything ever published before. It was a time where difference and the love of difference was the main important thing, which has the dream written all over it. Cut.